The Echo Chamber, brought to you by The Holmes Report and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers. Sponsored by the Bullet Group, putting you in tomorrow's conversations today.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Echo Chamber. I'm Maya Pawinska-Sims, the EMEA editor of Provoke, formerly known as the Holmes Report, and I'm here in London with Scott Guthrie, an independent influencer marketing consultant and co-author of a new future-proof report called We're All Influencers Now. Scott, hello and thanks for coming along for a chat.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. Great to see you finally. I know we've been trying to put this together for many weeks, possibly months.
I think it's actually a year.
Well,
I think it's actually a year we've been trying to do this. But we have a news hook now, so that's all good. Now, before we dive into this new guide or report, tell me a bit about your background and how you became interested in specialising in advising on influencer marketing.
Well, I've always been on the peripheries of public relations and marketing and communications. I started off my career a million years ago in journalism. And then moved to 210 Communications, which was bought out by PR Newswire. And ultimately, I was the first wire product manager for Europe, Middle East, and Africa.
Okay.
So I've always been in that area, but I had to make good on a promise to my significant other, Patricia, and we moved to Australia. And whilst I didn't think that employers would be queuing up with offers of work, I found it harder to get work than I thought. I had an MBA, I had 10 years at United British Media, had a strong track record, but I still found it hard. And so I built up sort of contacts more in London and in New York and Toronto, weirdly, out of Sydney, and sort of developing my own, I suppose, personal brand, and then moved more into understanding how social media influencers and bloggers, how they worked in the space. And then when I came back from 2 years in Sydney, I was offered an opportunity to head up a division in Ketchum.
Okay.
And that was largely, I suppose, through an introduction from Stephen Waddington, who was at the time the chief engagement officer there.
Okay, and why influencers though? What's the fascination there?
Well, I think it's old and it's new.
Like everything in commerce.
like everything, but we like to repackage it, rebadge it, and I think we've done that very, very well. PR has always worked with influencers. We've always worked with journalists. We've always worked with analysts. We understand influence and how to influence.
Key opinion leaders, all of that stuff.
Absolutely, all of that good stuff. But now, but now, I think it sounds a bit old-fashioned now, but through the social web, we have an ability to all be influencers now. So I think the industry is growing quickly, and it's got tremendous growth spurts, but it's also got some growing pains there as well. But I think it's still small enough to be malleable enough, and for me, in a very small way, to put my thumbprint on the industry, certainly in the UK. So I enjoy it that it's moving at a pace. I enjoy that it's professionalising at speed. My credibility, I suppose, my work experience and my academic sort of stuff can help sort of throw a rope around it and trying to pull it up and move it in the right direction. And that's what I'm trying to do with a little bit, in a very small way, with public relations as well.
Okay. Well, we can all do with a little bit of being pulling up by the bootstraps. So how are we defining an influencer now? When we think of the Instagram beauties with the filters and the water bottles and all that kind of stuff. But there's obviously a really strong B2B thread as well in influencers. How are we defining it?
Well, we could do the entire podcast to definitions, and I think that is part of the problem with influencer marketing as a discipline. We need a more robust lexicon. So when we talk about media, we understand that at one end it's the Financial Times and the other end it's the Daily Star and everything in between. We don't really understand that with influencer marketing. So influencer marketing can be, it can and it does, with underneath the great umbrella. It can be celebrity endorsement. It can be B2B influencer relations. It can be Instagram phenomenons. It can be reality TV star who have now moved on to Instagram. It can be a whole gamut of stuff. But for me, influence is really people, or social media influencers are people that are subject matter experts in whatever vertical it might be, that have consistently create compelling content, and they've created a community around that.
Okay.
And so with that community comes engagement, and with that community becomes an influence. It's an ability to change an opinion or a behaviour. And
why has the influencer ecosystem become so important to brands?
I think, what's the alternative? And it's a flippant and perhaps a trite comeback, but, we are not as trusting in institutions or in legacy media as we once were, or in big brands. Yeah. But we do tend to trust people that we think are relatable and people like us. So it's peer-to-peer, word of mouth. And we think of influence as that, but at scale, if you like. If you think about, how are you going to tap into an audience where the average Daily Mail reader, I think the average age is something like 59. The Daily Telegraph is in their 60s, and free-to-air linear television, again, the same sort of greying viewership, late 50s, early 60s for BBC One and Two. Channel 4, even the young pups, probably in the early 50s. So how are you going to tap into, how are you going to tap into... That gives us
some perspective, doesn't it?
So how are you going to reach an audience?
Anyone under 50.
Anyone under 50.
Yeah.
And of course, the whole way that we buy things has changed. If we want to buy if we want to do some product research, we turn to Google. We Google it, we look at reviews, but increasingly we turn to social media. And on social media, we are more likely to follow an influence on social media than we are a brand directly.
Yeah.
And more than 1 in 3, over a third of 16 to 24-year-olds will start their product research on social media.
Okay.
Than they will on. That's over Google, and that's over. I don't know, researching in a library or something absurd like that.
What's a library, Scott? What is a library? So how have you seen? You've obviously been following this for some time as this particular slice of the comms pie has developed. Have you seen the discipline and practice of influencer marketing evolve, and where are we now in terms of rigour and credibility and best practice and all that kind of grown-up stuff? So we're not just getting excited about throwing money at somebody with millions of followers.
Yep. Well, there's a slightly mean and pejorative term that influencer marketing is the Wild West, and I think that's unfair, and I think it's kind of badged up a little bit like that by mainstream media, and I think there are 4 reasons probably why it has been badged up by mainstream media as a lawless discipline. One, I think, because mainstream media has sort of eulogised it for several years. In the last 18 months, they've eased back, and it's a bit like the tall poppy syndrome. They've built it up now and knocking it down. I think, secondly, there is a commercial disincentive to keep promoting it from mainstream media, because increasingly influencers and mainstream media are vying for the same ad spend. I think 3, there's this conflation between influencer advertising and influencer marketing. Influencer advertising is kind of best thought of as Live Ireland contestants that have big Instagram following, and then there are some of them that may sell as many products, different products as possible, because they understand that their moment in the sun is finite.
Yes, they have their 15 minutes.
They've got their 15 minutes. And fourthly, there are some bad actors. But I think there are 4, and there are people that buy fake following and people that buy fake engagement. So I think there are 4 reasons why there is sort of a downplay, sort of a downer on influencer marketing in the mainstream media. I think the ASA, the Advertising Standards Authority, and the CMA, the Competitions and Market Authority, 2 big watchdogs in the UK, whose auspices extend over influencer marketing. They've been accused of being asleep at the wheel, and I think that's possibly the case. 2 years ago, they've done a lot of work in the last year, 18 months, to build that awareness, to put guidelines in place, and to produce lots of collateral on to bring awareness up, and they've done that pretty well. So in terms of where we are, I think we are a lot more sophisticated than the mainstream media would have us believe. And I think we're moving in the right direction with the Advertising Standards Authority and the Competition and Marketing Authority. How do we measure it? We're moving away from the vanity metrics of, of theoretical reach, of likes and engagement numbers. And I think we're moving more towards intent metrics and impact metrics.
Right.
And that's the way it's got to be. So we'll hear about influencer fraud. Yes, there are bad actors that buy fake followers, that buy fake engagement, but really they shouldn't come into the equation because we should be measuring beyond that.
Yeah.
What happens after the engagement? Have they swiped up? Have they clicked? Have they downloaded something? Have they bought something? That's where the measurement should be. So it's academic, how many of those are fake followers really, because we shouldn't be measuring that.
Well, it's like every other aspect of comms and PR, isn't it? The measurement metrics have got to go beyond channel reach and to go straight for business impact, really. So it's just bringing it in line with hopefully what the rest of the industry's doing. Now, you've co-authored a report with the Twitter famous influencer, Mr. Stephen Waddington, We're All Influencers Now, which is subtitled Guide to Influencer Marketing Governance for Public Relations, which sounds very grown up and serious. How did the guide come about?
Well, like all good ideas, it started off with a Negroni in a campaign.
David Gallagher, are you listening?
A Campari bar in Peckham. And
hang on, that's like those two things don't go together, do they? I mean, it's like, am I just dissing Peckham?
Well, I think you've gone on Only Fools and Horses. You'll have to come and check out the bar with me.
You're on. It's a date.
So I meet up with Waddington. Not as much as I used to when we were at Ketchum, but every 3 or 4 months. And whenever we do, we the conversation turns to influencer marketing. And I have frustrations. I've contacted and trying to work with the PRCA and the CIPR, and now we've actually now just very recently set up an influencer marketing panel at the CIPR. But back in the summer, I was frustrated that I think the natural home of influencer marketing really should be belong to public relations. Not to say it should own it, but I think it should really be at the top table leading it.
Yeah. And
I think it's an opportunity, because we said it at the top of the podcast, where we've always worked with influencers through journalists and analysts and key opinion leaders. But we're not very good at we're not as good as our more sharp-elbowed creative industry cousins at staking our claim on it.
Yeah.
And I think we've lost the argument a lot with things like content marketing or SEO or even social media of where does it sit. And so I was belly aching to Waddington several times, and he said, "Well, shut up, let's get on and let's do it." And rather sadly, halfway through our dinner, he got out his laptop, and by the end of the meal, we'd put a very rudimentary, bare bones structure on what the report might be.
Okay.
And that was its genesis.
Well, that's true commitment to your industry.
Well, that's why I was a bit disappointed. I was 2.5 pints in, and I was really rather looking forward to the next one. But I had to slow down and start thinking.
That'll teach you to have dinner with Stephen. So tell me what the issues are around governance and influencer marketing for the comms industry. What's the need here of the rule?
Well, the first one is we've touched on it a second ago. It's just awareness.
Okay.
What are the rules? The second, so what are there rules? Who governs it? And then what the rules are, and what the rules kind of are is it just about paid content? And so where I think it's where there might be a question mark with public relations, for example, who are sort of better known for gifting products or gifting experiences. Yeah. Let's say a hotel chain, if you invite someone in and give them a free stay, and hopefully there'll be coverage, or a meal or whatever it is, that's payment in kind. And so it is understanding what the rules are and how to declare those rules.
Okay, there's a bit which I think Sarah Waddington, who edits the whole Future Proof series, says in her intro to this particular guide, the rise of influencers has put marketing and public relations on a collision course between earned and paid media. And I want to know if you think that's a bad thing necessarily.
I think I think we're all blurring into one area. Now you have specialists within that area, But I don't think we can, and I think it's dangerous. That's why it might be a slightly nuanced point, but I make the point of leading influencer relations or influencer marketing rather than owning it. I think the days of ownership are over. That says to me, castles and moats and feudal life and serfs. Rather, we should be being collaborative.
Okay.
And so I think we can learn from each other, and we can demonstrate different areas of the practice. And probably, an example of that is, we're all in business to stay in business, and that's a given. But marketing looks after customers and prospective customers. Public relations people have a wider brief. That's all about all of the important people surrounding a company. And so, yes, influencer marketing is terribly good at selling stuff. Daniel Wellington has built a whole mid-price watch company, multi-million-pound company out of influence, dealing with influencers. Emily Weiss, 10 years ago, she was working at Vogue. She set up a blog into the Gloss. Now that company's worth $1 billion. So great at selling stuff. But there is often a higher calling possibly, or a different calling at least, within influencer marketing or influencer relations. Same tactics, different outcomes. So for example, I think that the Body Shop has worked with influencers in two very separate ways. One, to sell its products. It's got 1,000 products in its product line. Two, to not just raise awareness, but to make positive social change. And a couple of years ago, it had a campaign where it wanted to create or generate 8 million signatures for a petition against cruelty or testing cosmetics on animals. So that wasn't just about, have you seen the campaign, have you liked, have you engaged with it? It was actually signing up to a petition. And they achieved 8.2 million signatures in 10 months. So, where does that sit? Is that marketing, or is that public relations? There's a lot of talk now, about purpose wash or woke washing.
Purpose wash is everywhere.
And we're going to see so much more of that in this year. And influencer marketing is really pouncing on purposeful delivery. But where does that sit? And I hate to use the phrase the ethical guardian, but PR should be thinking beyond who is buying it and potential people are buying it. But really, are what we're saying true to, part of our DNA? Are they true to our values, or are we just trying to bandwagon onto the next thing?
And what do you think, given that there is that blurring of lines, which we're seeing across the board, what do you think the opportunity is for PR in the influencer marketing space? Does it matter whether we, say, not own it, but lead it?
I think we have to be there at the discussion. I think it really is important, because otherwise it will just be a paid-for discipline that is just about selling product. And yes, whether it's wristwatches or toothpaste or lipstick, that's great. But there can be something bigger, something a higher calling. Whether it's campaigning against animal cruelty, or whether there was a great campaign by the British Army this last year, working with an influencer marketing. Now they weren't selling more products, but they were trying to get more people to sign up to the British Army. And if I look at my notes very quickly, a month into the campaign, they had their Army applications were up 71%, and within 7 months into their recruitment year, they'd had 80% of their roles were filled. Now that's not selling a stuff. That is a higher calling.
It's changing behaviour.
Yeah, that's changing behaviour, and so that's where it sits in PR. So does it matter? Yes, it does, because otherwise I think we'll just be blindsided and we'll just go down one route when it could be the discipline could be opened up to different ideas.
Okay, and be a lot more creative as a result. What are the pitfalls? Because there's dangers here. We've talked a little bit about influencer fraud, fake followers, whether reach is a true number, whether in fact reach matters at all. Influencer fraud always makes me think of the infamous Fire Festival, where the influencers themselves were kind of duped into influencing on something that didn't exist. So it's kind of it's a multi-layered fraud there. Yeah. What are the pitfalls and things to be aware of, rather than just diving straight into? I mean, I guess identifying the right people to work with must come right at the top of that.
Well, I think even before then, is the channel right for your objectives?
Okay.
So right back, if someone says, a brand approaches me and said, I want to help you with your, I want you to help us with your influencer marketing. I say that's awesome. What's your objective? And it might be influencer marketing might be perfect. It might not be.
Okay.
Secondly, then you have to understand, your audience, and then you do some audience mapping with the influencers' audience. The pitfalls, yes, I think Casper, the bed in the box manufacturer, mentioned in its IPO documentation listed influencers as a risk. So, I mean, again, we said it right at the top of our chat today. There's a problem with the lexicon around influencer marketing. I think Casper had a beef with affiliate marketing sites and review sites. So where does that sit within influencer marketing? But yes, when you are searching for the most appropriate influencer, yes, that is where you should spend the time and making sure that they are the most appropriate. So that you'll start with the data, and you'll start with understanding. Are they the right age, and are they in the right location geographically, and all of those good stuff. Have they bought fake followers and bought fake engagement? All of that good stuff. But it's also the contextual intelligence of the communicator. So do they share the same values? Is it the right sort of tone of voice? Have they mentioned your brand in the past? They might not have worked with you, but have they mentioned you in the past? And if so, has the sentiment been positive or neutral or even negative? Those sorts of things. And it takes time to do that properly, and therefore it's costly, and you need third-party tools. So it makes perfect sense, I think, if you've gone through that heartache of identifying them and searching them and then vetting them and then ultimately selecting them and then putting them in the contract and get the lawyers involved. Why would you not continue to work with them and create a better form, mutually beneficial relationship?
Yeah.
But often often the different industries will look at influencers as a media buy. They'll see their reach, they'll treat them like a billboard. That they'll see that the audience maps nicely. They'll buy them for one activation, and then they won't use them again. So when you have that sort of approach, that transactional approach, then the creativity is not there because the trust isn't there on both sides. So both sides, the influencer and the brand, when they don't put much effort into it, they don't really care about it. So I think that's another area where I suppose the more rounded and the relationship building aspect of public relations should be built into it.
And indeed, many of the big agencies have invested an awful lot into building their own tools. MSL springs to mind.
Yeah.
They've really spent some money on making sure that this is going to be a viable and sustainable strand of comms, and that particular ability the industry has to relate to lots of different stakeholders.
Well, of course, because it's about reputation, and you can't legislate for what a human's going to do in the future. We all have the propensity to be jerks.
That's that Tom Cruise movie, isn't it? Punished for our future crimes.
Right. But what we can do is limit that exposure by doing a proper proper vetting and proper research. You said you're not the Holmes Report. I almost let that go.
Formerly known as the Holmes Report.
But if you are hiring a new journalist, yes, you'll look at their skill set, you'll look at their experience. But you'll probably dig into what they've done, their tone of voice, and all those sorts of things. You'll do that because you want them to be a valued member of your team for a long time. And why wouldn't you go into it with the same sort of recruitment hat? Going into working with influencers.
That's an interesting way of looking at it. You are kind of recruiting a member of the team, aren't you?
Yeah.
It's also going to have a very public-facing role.
It's very public, and it's your reputation, of course.
So do some crystal ball gazing for us. Where is influencer marketing going this year and beyond? How can you see it evolving further?
Well, it's only getting bigger. Is it a fad? No, it's not a fad, and we know that it's not. That it's in the words of Karen Carpenter, it's only just begun. we know that because big businesses and big brains are putting big money into it.
Yeah.
You've got Estee Lauder now saying that it's putting 75% of its ad spend behind influencer marketing.
Really, that much?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
So, and you've got Martin Sorrell, now with his S4 Capital, just bought IMA, influencer marketing agency out of the Netherlands, and is sticking that into Media Monks. Clever guy, obviously, and he sees the future, all digital, and influencer marketing. You've got the mainstream media and some of the vertical media are down on the influencer marketing with Keith Weed, the outgoing CMO of Unilever, and they quoted him on the eve of Cannes year before last, saying all about influencer fraud and how he's 3 commitments, to influencer fraud. What wasn't really picked up was, or in the same speech, him saying how helpful, how useful, how important influencer marketing was. So a matter of weeks after his retirement, after 30-plus years at Unilever, he announced his first investment post-retirement was in an influencer marketing platform.
Okay.
A couple of weeks later, Unilever announced that it just helped raise $12.5 million to put into another influencer marketing platform. So big brains, big money is going into the industry. Woke washing, purpose washing, green washing, whatever, that's going to be a big thing. And so you really need to, seasoned practitioners need to be able to hold their own clients to account and say, that's great, but it's not part of your DNA.
It's got to be consistent, hasn't it?
It's got to be, you've really got to care about it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, otherwise the audience are really going to, it's not going to pass the smell test, and you get found out, and and it'll be detrimental, obviously, to your reputation. I think we talked a lot in this session about how brands vet influencers. I think increasingly influencers are going to vet brands.
Good point. Yeah.
An influencer, is a social publisher. It's a media masthead of one. They're looking after their own corporate identity, and they are only going to work with brands that they admire and trust and respect. And if they don't, their community will hold their heels to the fire and say, no, this doesn't work for me. You're a sellout, and then you lose your audience. Therefore, you lose your influence, and then you're out of business. So those are, I think, 3. I think virtual influencers, they'll stop to be a sci-fi thing and start to be a real thing. And I think the presidential election and sort of deep fakes will make us understand the potential, the positive potential of virtual influencers, where I think they're going to start coming in.
Okay. Oh, gosh, that's quite scary. I look forward to seeing that. Now, finally, give me your top takeaway or tip for comms professionals who are working with influencers in 2020. Well,
there are a couple. I think we've covered them all, but influencer marketing exists, and it's your turf. It's not someone else's turf.
Okay.
There's a tremendous example of an activation by ProRail in the Netherlands, which is the Dutch equivalent of Network Rail. They sought to lower the number of accidents on the Dutch railways. That's not selling product. That's not selling. That's doing a really powerful cause. So it's your territory to own, and it doesn't have to be just about gifting programs or press releases or event invitations. It's public relations and it's PRs and it's comms' turf to own, or to lead, I should say.
Okay, cool. Scott, thank you very much for joining
I talked
me.
too quickly.
No, you didn't. It's all good.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming on.
You've been listening to The Echo Chamber. Brought to you by The Holmes Report and produced by Marketeers. Sponsored by the Bullet Group, putting you in tomorrow's conversations today.